Hey, welcome to the Manhood Podcast. Provider, protector, procreator, promise keeper. Yeah, you hear a little Fat Man Scoop in the background. Rest in peace to Fat Man Scoop, one of the greatest hype men ever to step up to a microphone and start hyping up a party. We love him to death, and God bless him. And you know I like my hype music, so I had to start off the broadcast today with a little bit of Fat Man Scoop. It's been a little while since I've been on the air. Life has just been lifing, and nothing in particular. But as you all know, I'm always trying to figure out what is a good dad, what is a bad dad. We had a whole episode on that, I believe, in the first season, good dad versus bad dad, and what is it really a good dad and a bad dad. And I came across some information from Malcolm Gladwell. He wrote a book called Outliers back in 2008, and he studied people who were just exceptional. Bill Gates was one of the people that he studied. The Beatles, a group that he studied. There were other people that he studied, may not be as famous, may not be as familiar to you. He also studied, he's Canadian. He studied Canadian hockey players, and the ones that really became great, what was it that made them great? And one of the things that he kept going over and over in the book was 10,000 hours. In order to master a skill or a task, it took 10,000 hours of rehearsing that skill correctly. Now, if you rehearse it incorrectly, those hours don't count. It's got to be done correctly, 10,000 hours. And he talked about the Beatles, how I think it was from 1968 to 70 something. They had performed over 1,200 times together, accumulating their 10,000 hours in a very short period of time, I think 3 to 4 years. He talks about in his own life as a writer, it took him 10 years to complete those 10,000 hours. And if you think about it, if you put in 40 hours a week on your job, 50 hours a year, right? That's 2,000 hours. It would take you 5 years, 40 hours a week to get in 10,000 hours. So when I start to apply that to being a father, I don't know if we get 40 hours a week to spend with our kids. So if we spent 20 hours a week, let's say, with our kids, it would take 10 years to master that craft. Well, if I started, I won't even say started 2 years old. At 10, that child would be 12 years old. The things that I am doing as a father with a 2-year-old are drastically different than I'm doing with a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. So I don't know if I'm actually doing the same things or if this whole 10,000 hour thing actually applies. You know, I've been looking at a good dad or a bad dad, meaning did you have a good dad and therefore you had someone to model for you how to be a good dad, therefore that would translate into you becoming a good father. Well, as you've seen, many of the guests that I've had on the broadcast didn't have fathers in their life. Joseph Thomas, he talked about being glad his father was no longer there. And you can go back and listen to that episode. Kenny Bryant talked about not having his father there and reading his biological father until he was 35 years old. So, and those men are, in my estimation, great fathers. And there are others who've been on the broadcast as well. So I don't think that has a direct correlation. It is good. You know, even in Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, he talks about your environment being part of what makes you successful at something. And having that environment helps, but it also helps to have practice at it. So I started gnawing at this 10,000 hour thing. Where do we get this 10,000 hours of actual practice of being a good father? Some of it starts with, I strongly believe this, and I'm still researching and still looking for answers as to what makes a great dad. Even, at the end, what is a great dad, but how do you develop a great dad? And one of the things with the 10,000 hours is if you were an older sibling or you had to, as a child, had to care for a younger child, I believe that begins your 10,000 hours. Personally, I look at my son. He has two young daughters. He is a phenomenal dad. And I often look at him and say, where did he get this stuff from? And I wish I could claim that he learned it from me. He didn't. He far exceeds what I was doing as a dad when my children were that age. He just blows it away. So I'm like, okay, so where did he learn it at? So he was 10 when his first sister was born, and 12 when his second sister was born. And my late wife was ill at the time, so he and his older brother had to pitch in and help raise them. They were probably changing diapers much younger than most men do, or young boys do. They knew how to hold a bottle. They knew how to make a bottle at very young ages when they were early teens, preteens, actually, how to do those things because they had to pitch in and help. And I believe that's where their 10,000 hours of training got started at. Many times as males, we are discouraged from learning how to be nurturing. You see a boy playing with a doll and the first thing you're like, put that doll down. What are you doing? I remember growing up as a kid, I didn't play with dolls until there's anything wrong with it. But my brother started playing with like G.I. Joes and different action figures and things like that. And I remember my father not sitting real well with him initially, seeing my brother doing those types of things. But that was the atmosphere at that time that, as a young boy, you don't play with dolls. You don't, you're not combing hair. You're not changing clothes. You're not playing tea. All of these little things, they had a stigma about them. So that part of you never developed as a young man growing up, never developed. Then you grow up and you make a baby. Now, this child comes along, and I'm not saying this is the only factor that goes with it. And you were always told to stay away from those things, and you kind of veer away from them, or you're afraid of them. You have no experience. You have nothing that is innate about you that says, hey, I need to do these things. I need to hold that child. I need to connect with that child, even though it cannot talk. Now, once the child gets older, you can start throwing a ball with them and stuff like that. Even many men, in some cases, don't connect with their female children. And I'm sure many of us have heard men say, oh, I can't wait to have a son. I can't wait to have a son. And then they have a daughter, and then they have another daughter, and then they have another daughter. And then and they keep going, trying to have that son. And I've heard men say that real men have daughters and not sons. Thank God I got two of each, so I'm not in that debate at all. All right, but there seems to be a stigma, a cutting off, a truncating of a male child's natural instinct to nurture. And it's cut off, it's truncated. And then when they do have a child, it should kick in. And again, this is not absolute. This is not an excuse for a man not stepping up and becoming a father. It's an explanation. And hopefully it'll help us in training our young boys better to become young men and then to become fathers later on. And I'm still researching, kind of fleshing this out. But if I take that idea of the 10,000 hours, because just doing it with one child there's some things that I would have to practice that are not activity based. I'm not changing diapers on a 10-year-old the way I would on a newborn. So as a father, that activity is not necessarily there. The conversations I have with a 10-year-old are different than I would have with a 2, 4, or 6-year-old. The books that I read to a 10-year-old are different than the books that I'm reading to an infant. So if I look at that 10-year span, again, 20 hours a week for 50 weeks out of the year to get to my 10,000 hours, all right, over a 10-year period to get to the point where I've truly mastered the art. Then I have to ask myself the question, well, you know what? I had 2 kids in less than 3 years. Does my time actually double because I have 2 kids? I got an infant. I got a 2.5-year-old. I am fathering them at the same time. Does my 10,000 hours of that double, instead of, so for every hour that I spend with the 2 children together, do I now get 2 hours of credit towards my 10,000? It starts to break down when you start doing that, because then I said, well, if I had 3 children or 4 children, now my 10 years ends up being 5 years and I'm a master at this thing. I wish it were that simple. I really believe that you have to want to develop a child who is going to be successful. In your mind, as a parent, mother or father, you want your child to be successful. And then you have to go about putting them in an environment to be successful, to develop the intangibles within that child. The confidence. And we've talked about how father being present in a child's house and with a child brings about confidence in that child. Okay. There are just so many intangible things that you want to give that child. I was talking to my daughter earlier today, and she has supreme confidence. She believes she can do just about anything. My 2 daughters, they actually scare me many times because they're not afraid of anything. Their brothers are both over 6 foot tall. They have 5 male cousins who are all tall. They're not intimidated by any man. Now, their family, their cousins, their brothers know that they're going to have to deal with me. They're going to have to deal with their grandmother. They're going to have to deal with their aunts if they do something to those 2 girls. But some dude out in the street, not so much. But my daughters don't realize that. They don't realize that there's a difference there. And they will say anything, do almost anything to a guy in the street the way they would to their cousins or to their brothers. And that scares me more than it scares them. And it should probably scare them more, so they would be a little more reserved in what they do. My daughter's probably going to be upset with me. She was having an argument with her boyfriend when she was in high school. She actually took the keys out of the ignition, threw them out of the window into the grass at nighttime. It was 9-10 o'clock at night. They're sitting in the driveway having an argument about something, and she threw his keys out there. And I'm like, okay, you do not want to do that to a young man, who got to be home at a certain time, probably has pressures from his mother and everything else, who may not have the restraint not to hit you. Then, I keep bail money just in case. Okay. So I'm going to have to spend my bail money because he put his hands on my daughter. Right. But I digress. The 10,000 hours, the perfecting of becoming a father, actually starts as a young man. And if you want your son to one day become a good father, it starts when he's 5, 6, 7 years old. Maybe he has a younger sibling. How is he towards his younger sibling? Does he want to fight them all the time? Is he jealous of them all the time? Is he not sharing his toys with his younger sibling? Is he not concerned about the welfare of his younger sibling? Those are the things we have to start teaching children as toddlers, going into their 3, 4, 5-year-old, probably right after those terrible 2s, somewhere in there, to start to showing care. And maybe you have an only child. Maybe you don't have a second child. Do they have a cousin? Is there a friend of a friend? They need to learn how to tap into, I'm just going to say their feminine side. Okay. Feminine does not mean female. Female and male are genders. Okay. We all have both feminine and masculine energies. Girl children have masculine energy as well as female energy. Male childs have masculine and female energies. Men are nurturers and need to be nurturers to their children. They nurture in a different way than females would do. I think I saw a video online. This preacher, he was talking about, he went to his son's basketball game, and Saturday afternoon they spent, going to these tournaments and everything else. And, you spend money going to these things and everything. And the son's team lost by like 20 or 30 points. And the mother was like, oh, he played so well. He really tried hard and everything. And the father was like, oh, forget all of that. Y'all ain't going out there and losing by no 20 points. You stop them kids from shooting. It's a different type of nurturing. The child needs both. He felt bad that he got beat by 20 points. So he needed his mother to say, okay, it's all right. But he also needed his father to kick him in the pants and say, listen, you got to work harder and try harder. So both things are needed. Sometimes you only have one parent available, and you got to play good cop and bad cop type of thing. If you want to call it good cop, bad cop, right? All of those things are important in the development of a child so that child can now grow up and become a parent. It's a cycle. Okay. That child, in order to become that parent, has to tap into its nurturing side, its feminine side, and be able to show that care and concern for another child. Like I talked about, both my sons pitched in and helped raise my daughters, and they are excellent. My second son has 2 biological children. I got 2 beautiful grandbabies. My oldest son helps raise his nephew, his wife's sister's son, just like his son. Just does an unbelievable job. Very, very paternal. Has always been that way, even with his siblings, my oldest son. So older children looking out for younger children, they start to develop those skills, those instincts on how to parent and become a good father, and they become good fathers. Other men will step away because they haven't had the opportunity along the way. Could be some trauma that's happened to them in their life. Could be the way that they were raised. Stay away. You can't, don't hold any babies. Don't put a bottle in a baby's mouth. Don't play with any dolls. You don't babysit. I know I think I was 12, 13 years old. My neighbor had me babysitting their 2 daughters. I lived in a fairly mixed neighborhood in the 70s. Let's say it was when I was 12. Yeah, I guess I was 12, 13 years old. And these were 2 Jewish young ladies. Okay, so different racially, different religiously. Their parents trusted me to be able to babysit them. I was showing my nurturing side, my feminine side, if you will, at a young age. I also took care of my brother and my sister growing up. I was explaining I had a cousin who had tragedy in their life, and they came and they lived with us for a short period of time. And I found myself being paternal even to my cousin, who was maybe 3, 4, 5 years younger than I was at the time. But those instincts were never halted. Okay, they were never shut off. Whereas in some cases, if you're growing up, you're discouraged from doing those things. And a woman, when she is pregnant, physically, her body changes. Okay, weight gain, hips, breast, pains, the baby kicking during the 9-month period, chemicals in your body start to change. Everything is a change. And then you've also been nurtured almost from a little girl, 2 years old, to be maternal. So that when you do give birth, and this is not all women, of course, some women are terrified when they give birth. Other women run into it. And then there's some that, in between. But you go into it, and when the baby is born, you start right away taking care of the child. Now, the father of that child may not right away, and we've talked about this before, kick in. Him really knowing, understanding, doing what he needs to do as a father and taking care, especially if you're not together as a couple or husband and wife, then it really, really gets complicated. I know a situation where young man had a baby with a young lady who was his girlfriend. The girlfriend is living with her parents. He would get off work late. And it was just disrespectful for him to go to her house to see his baby late at night. So there's a lot of different things that are happening there. But there are some men who that instinct to be a parent doesn't kick in the first year, the second year, the third year, maybe the fourth year. That child will probably be a child for 21 years. We'll say 21 years, and then the child becomes an adult. It could be 18 years as an adult. Whenever that instinct kicks in for that man, don't get in the way of him being a father. I know, as the mother of a child and the family of the mother of a child, there may be some resentment. You may harbor some bad feelings toward that man because he wasn't there. He didn't pick up. He didn't do what he was supposed to do. He didn't buy the diapers. He didn't take that child for any of the medical visits. He did not support the child financially. But when he does come around and finally starts doing what he's supposed to be doing, leave an open door for him. And I'm not saying that for his sake, for the baby mother's sake. I'm saying that for the child's sake. Give him that opportunity to be the parent, to be the father, even if you're not with that man anymore. Leave the possibility for him to be a father to that child. It is better for the child. Put your feelings aside, baby mom's family, and allow that man to now attempt to be the father. Again, don't let him hurt the child or anything else. Maybe it needs to be supervised, but make an opportunity, make a safe space for him to come in and you might want to have a conversation with him about, hey, you didn't do what you were supposed to do, but there's a lot of runway left for you to make up for the lost time and to be the father that child needs you to be to them and for them. And ask, look at his history, look at his pathology and see, where did he get the 10,000 hours and where is he going to get the 10,000 hours now that he has a child? Listen, as always, I appreciate you taking the time to listen to the podcast. Anywhere you get your podcasts at, iHeart, Apple, you name it. Anywhere you get your podcast at, go and get the podcast. You can listen to it. You can watch us on YouTube if you like. I really appreciate it. If you go to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel, trying to get my number of subscribers up, and do appreciate it. Listen, once again, thank you for listening. I wish and hope that all the men in your life that are fathers are outliers. They are great, super, super duper fathers. And if they're not, there's something that I've said that you think might help them, please share the podcast with them, share the information with them. So maybe just something to think about in their lives and get them moving in the right direction. All right. Have a good one. Thanks much.